Prologue. The Legend of the Firebird. The sky above the chaos wastes bled crimson, an endless wound that oozed across a tortured world. Winds howled with voices not born of any living throat, screaming dirges of hatred and madness. Beneath that hateful firmament, the earth was a cracked battlefield of broken bones and scorched stone, soaked through with blood, both fresh and ancient. Amongst this eternal carnage they fought, the bloodbound, mad champions of Khorne, clad in iron wrought from the forges of madness, flesh tattooed with the ruins of slaughter. Their axes rose and fell in a never-ending rhythm of murder, each blow a prayer, each severed head an offering, skulls piled atop skulls in grim monuments to their god. The air tasted of iron and rot, the ground steamed with gore. At the heart of a shattered plain where molten rivers bisected ruined keeps and blackened forests, a warband had gathered. Their banners, torn hides daubed with crude symbols of Khorne, snapped in the fetid wind. Warriors, some still dripping from battle, others licking the blood from their weapons like dogs, huddled around fires that burned not with wood, but with the corpses of the fallen. Around one such flame, a storyteller began to speak, not a bard in any civilized sense, but a blood-soaked priest, one eye a hollow socket, the other glinting with fevered light. His voice rasped, ragged from endless screams, yet it carried across the gathered killers like a spell. "You know of the Firebird," he began, and at once the muttering ceased. Even the most savage among them, daubed in dried blood and with teeth filed to points, leaned closer. "It is no beast of mortal realms, no wyvern, no foul demon of Tzient's spawn. It is fury made flesh. It is Khorne's rage, given wings." The fire cracked and spat as he spoke, casting shadows that danced like battling wraiths across the assembled bloodbound. His voice dropped, each word heavy as a hammerfall. "Long ago, when the gods first made war among themselves, when the mountains bled rivers of fire and the sky itself was cleaved in twain, Khorne took a shard of his own wrath and hurled it into the mortal world. From that fragment rose the Firebird, a creature of living flame, whose screams can melt iron, whose talons tear through the veil between realms." The listeners shifted uneasily. Even among monsters there were things that inspired awe and fear. "It is said," the priest continued, spitting into the fire where it hissed and recoiled, "that to master the Firebird is to drink of Khorne's purest wrath, that he who bends its neck beneath his axe will rise above all others, not merely a warlord, not merely a favored of the blood god, but a vessel, a chosen incarnate of endless slaughter." A warrior spoke, his voice rough as grinding stones. Where does it roost, this creature of flame?" The priest laughed, a dry cackle that ended in a coughing fit. When he straightened, blood rimmed his broken teeth. "In the farthest reaches, beyond even the spires of the world's edge, past the lands where demons make sport of mortal souls, upon Mount Kazaroth, where the sky bleeds fire and the stones weep blood. There, amid volcanoes that roar, Khorne's name, the Firebird, waits." Another warrior growled, skeptical. "Many have sought it, none return." The priest's one eye gleamed brighter. "Aye, for to seek the Firebird is to die 1,000 deaths. It tests the soul, the flesh, the will. Only the strongest may even glimpse its flames. Only the truly wrathful shall dare to chain it." The fire before them flared high, briefly forming the image of a vast winged shape, a silhouette crowned in fire, its eyes twin stars of murder. Gasps rippled through the crowd, not of fear, but of hunger. Here, in this world of endless battle, even legends were fuel for ambition. Some rose at once, seizing their weapons, their minds already turning toward the long, blood-soaked path that might lead them to ultimate glory. Others scoffed, deeming it a fool's errand, and returned to their grisly feasting. But among them, unseen, a single figure remained, still as stone. His armor was battered and pitted, his axe chipped and crusted with the dried blood of countless foes. Across his bare scalp was branded the 8-pointed star, though the skull rune of corn had begun to sear its way over it, blistering flesh anew. Vargosh, Bloodseeker of the broken clans, watched the flames with unblinking eyes. He had lost everything, his warband shattered, his name a curse among the tribes. Shame gnawed at him more viciously than any demon ever could. And now, before him, lay a chance not merely for redemption, but for ascendance. The Firebird's flame would be his. He would bend its fury to his will or be destroyed in the attempt. Either way, he would no longer crawl in the filth of dishonor. He rose slowly, axe in hand, his shadow long and jagged in the bloodlit night. The wastes themselves seemed to tremble as he set forth, a silent oath burning behind his teeth. The legend of the Firebird would not remain legend for long. Chapter 1. The Broken Clans. The Chaos Wastes had never known peace, but today they screamed louder than usual. Vargosh stood amidst the wreckage of the Red Fangs, his breath ragged behind the jagged grill of his iron warmack. His axe, an ancient thing of blackened steel and crude demonic etchings, dripped with blood that hissed where it struck the scorched soil. The battlefield around him was a seething morass of dying men, severed limbs, and shattered armor. The ground had become a slurry of mud and gore, clutching at boots and dragging down the fallen into its greedy embrace. Above, the sky was a sullen, boiling red, as if the heavens themselves watched in eager anticipation. The iron vultures struck first, lean, vicious raiders with skin stretched tight over wiry muscles, their rusted weapons crackling with stolen sorceries. They had descended from the cliffs at dawn like carrion birds, screaming praises to nameless gods as they fell upon the Red Fangs. Then came the Ashmaws, heaving from the horizon in a thundering stampede, their warriors bloated with cannibalistic strength, hacking and biting like beasts barely clinging to humanity. Vargosh had led the charge against the first wave, his axe biting deep into flesh and bone. He had carved a crimson swath through the enemy ranks, his warband roaring behind him. For a moment, one brief, shining moment, it had seemed as if victory might be theirs. Then the vultures unleashed their second wave, black-fletched arrows blotting the sky, and the Ashmaws surged with fresh monsters at their head, grotesque, semi-demonic things stitched from man and beast. The line of the Red Fangs buckled, warriors fell screaming, their flesh torn and boiled by sorcerous fires, shields shattered, axes clattered from nerveless fingers. Vargosh fought like a creature possessed. His axe found the throat of a vulture captain, ripping it open in a gory fountain. His shield caved in the face of an Ashmaw berserker, the skull splitting with a crack like splitting wood. But for every foe he felled, 3 more pressed in, a tide of blades and hunger and hate. He saw his lieutenant, Carrick the Skull-Eater, dragged down under a mass of writhing bodies, screaming obscenities until his voice was lost in a wet, tearing sound. He saw Gratha, his battle sister, her twin axes whirling in a desperate dance, until a barbed spear erupted from her mouth and lifted her twitching body high into the air like a trophy. Bit by bit, the Red Fangs were shredded, scattered like offal before the feast. Vargosh fought until his muscles screamed and his armor hung in tatters from his frame. He slew until the weight of the dead around him rose higher than his knees. He roared Khorne's name into the choking, bloody air until his voice was a torn whisper. It was not enough. A hammer blow from a giant of the Ashmaws smashed into his shield, shattering it into splinters. The impact hurled him from his feet, his body tumbling through the mire like a rag doll. For a moment, the world was a spinning chaos of red and black. When Vargosh rose again, the battlefield was lost. The few surviving Red Fangs fled into the blasted hills, hounded like animals. The iron vultures raised their banners in mocking victory. The ash-maws howled their triumph, wallowing in the dead, tearing out entrails and feasting where they fell. Vargosh stumbled backward up a ridge, blood leaking from a dozen wounds, his axe dragging behind him. He watched it all with hollow, burning eyes. His warband, his brothers and sisters in blood, gone. Their skulls would adorn the cairns of their enemies. Their names would be spat upon and forgotten, their blood price unpaid. A hot wind blew across the carnage, stirring the embers of burning corpses and carrying with it a sound that was almost a whisper, almost a scream. Firebird? The word flared in Vargosh's mind like a brand, unbidden, searing. He remembered the stories, the fevered sermons of priests, and the mad ravings of dying warlocks. The Firebird, the living wrath of Khorne, the beast of flame and blood, whose power could unmake armies, whose flames could purify failure and forge legend. Vargosh tightened his grip on the haft of his axe. His body trembled, not from weakness, but from a fury so intense it made the air around him shimmer. He dropped to one knee, pressing his blood-slick forehead to the broken earth, and bared his teeth in a savage, blood-choked oath. "We must find it," he rasped. His voice was little more than a guttural growl, but the air seemed to still, listening. "I will find the Firebird. I will seize its flame. I will burn the names of the Red Fangs into the bones of this world. I will not be broken." He rose slowly, every movement a prayer of defiance. Beside him, the battlefield steamed and writhed under the dying light. Before him stretched the endless desolation of the chaos wastes, a land where dreams died screaming, and the strong carved their names into the marrow of reality. Vargosh set his jaw, his eyes two burning coals in the ruin of his face. He was alone now, but he was Vargosh Bloodseeker, and his path would be written in fire and blood. He turned from the ruin of his past and strode into the wastes, a solitary figure against the endless, blood-stained horizon. And somewhere far ahead, beyond mountains that wept and rivers that burned, the Firebird stirred in its volcanic roost, sensing the coming of a soul as violent and unrelenting as its own. Chapter 2. Visions of Flame. The howling winds of the chaos wastes clawed at Vargosh like starving beasts, dragging filth and ash across his battered armor. Days had bled into nights, each indistinguishable from the next in a maelstrom of bloodlust and ruin. His wounds had festered, his muscles ached with a deep, punishing fatigue of survival, but the fire in his heart raged hotter than ever. He had followed whispers, crude rumors carried on the tongues of scavenger tribes and broken warriors. Whispers of a skull grinder, a priest-smith of Khorne whose forge fires burned so hot they could melt the flesh from a man's bones without touch, whose weapons were said to be blessed with visions from the blood god himself. If anyone could point him toward the Firebird, it was such a creature. Now, in a ravine split deep into the marrow of the earth, Vargosh found his quarry. The Skullgrinder's lair was a pit of black rock and molten rivers, its walls slick with ichor and sweat. Jagged statues, crude effigies of Khorne, each crowned with a pyramid of skulls, loomed in silent judgment. The heat was suffocating, every breath a searing brand on the lungs. The air pulsed with the rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil, each blow a heartbeat of agony and devotion. At the heart of it all, a figure labored. The Skullgrinder was a towering mass of muscle and molten iron. His flesh was burned and cracked like kilned pottery, pulsing with unnatural heat. His face was a ruin of scar tissue, the nose long burned away, teeth bared in an eternal rictus of pain and joy. He wore nothing but chains and iron plates, and in his hands he wielded a hammer large enough to crush a man's torso in a single swing. Without warning, the monstrous priest stopped his work. He turned, blackened eyes locking onto Vargosh across the infernal gloom. A shudder of primal recognition passed between them. Two servants of the blood god, drawn together by the scent of slaughter and destiny. The skull grinder spoke, voice a guttural roar that shook the very stones. You seek power, you reek of desperation. Vargosh advanced, raising his axe in a warrior's salute. I seek the Firebird. The skullgrinder's ruined face twisted into something like a grin. Then you must earn the vision, Bloodseeker, he rasped, hefting his hammer. Without further parley, the giant hurled himself at Vargosh. The clash was titanic. The hammer came down like a falling star. Vargosh barely twisted aside, the blows splitting the earth where he had stood, sending shards of molten rock screaming into the air. He countered with a savage looping strike, his axe aiming for the skullgrinder's exposed flank. Sparks burst from iron-hard skin as the blade bit deep, but not deep enough. The skullgrinder roared, swinging his hammer sideways in a brutal arc. It smashed into Vargosh's side, lifting him from his feet and hurling him across the pit. He crashed into a heap of discarded bones with a thunderous clatter, pain blooming in his ribs like molten nails. Blood filled his mouth, his vision swam. But Vargosh he wiped the blood from his lips and bellowed a guttural cry of pure, undiluted rage. He charged, broken ribs grinding against each other, his axe a blur of murderous intent. Steel rang against iron. Flesh tore, bones shattered. They fought like beasts, like avatars of Khorne himself, each blow a sacrament, each wound a hymn. Vargosh battered at the skullgrinder's defenses with relentless fury, carving deep gouges into flesh that steamed and hissed with every strike. The hammer fell again and again, cracking Vargosh's armor, crushing muscle and bruising bone, but he did not yield. Minutes stretched into an eternity of violence. Then, at last, Vargosh found an opening. With a snarl, he feinted low, baiting the skullgrinder's hammer into a wild swing. In that heartbeat of vulnerability, he surged forward and drove his axe deep into the priest's shoulder, splitting meat and sinew with a sickening crunch. The skullgrinder staggered back, roaring in agony. But he did not strike again. Instead, he threw back his head and laughed, a terrible, broken sound that echoed off the cavern walls like the tolling of a death bell. You are worthy, he wheezed, blood pouring from the wound, sizzling where it touched the ground. Before Vargosh could react, the skullgrinder seized his head in both iron-hard hands. The world exploded. Fire swallowed Vargosh's vision, searing away thought and reason. He screamed, but the sound was torn from him, devoured by the inferno. Images hammered into his mind with the force of 1,000 warhammers. A mountain range, its peaks like jagged knives, clawed at a sky aflame with blood-red lightning. A colossal volcano, vomiting rivers of molten rock that roared Khorne's name into the heavens. And above it all, the Firebird. It was vast beyond comprehension, a titan of flame and fury, its wings spanning the horizon, each beat sending shockwaves through the sky. Its feathers were molten steel, each quill a screaming soul. Its eyes were twin suns of hate, and its screech shattered mountains and boiled oceans. The Firebird's gaze locked onto him, into him, and he saw himself reflected there, not as a broken warlord, but as a god of blood and fire, a living avatar of wrath, his enemies reduced to ash beneath his shadow. The vision seared into his very soul, branding it with a destiny that could not be denied. Then, mercifully, the flames receded. Vargosh collapsed to his knees, smoke rising from his flesh. His eyes were twin embers, burning with a new-found purpose. The skull-grinder loomed over him, swaying like a dying colossus. "Beyond the world's edge," the priest gurgled, blood pouring from his mouth. "Atop Mount Kazaroth, there you will find it." With those final words, the skull-grinder fell, a thunderous crash that shook the cavern. Vargosh rose, battered, broken, but reborn. The path was clear now, carved into his mind with the fire of a god. He turned his back on the skull-grinder's corpse and stalked into the darkness beyond, the vision of flame burning forever in his mind, each step carrying him closer to his destiny, and to the Firebird that would make him more than mortal. It would make him eternal. Chapter 3. The Mark of Wrath. The night was alive with screams. Vargosh stood naked atop a plateau of broken basalt, his body slick with sweat and blood beneath the burning gaze of a shattered moon. Around him, the corpses of the unwilling formed a grisly ring, men, mutants, beasts, each hacked down in brutal offering to the blood god. Their blood soaked the cracked earth, filling the air with a thick, cloying stench that stung the lungs and made the skin itch. The wind here shrieked like a living thing, tearing at his flesh with icy claws, but Vargosh barely felt it. His mind was a roaring inferno, drowned in the endless call for slaughter. At the heart of the plateau, a pit had been carved, a gaping wound in the earth, its sides lined with jagged rocks slick with dark, congealed blood. Flames, blood-red and sickly yellow, licked from the depths of the pit, vomiting thick smoke into the sky. Vargosh approached it, axe in hand, every step a wordless prayer. He remembered the skull-grinder's final words, etched into his mind like iron driven into flesh. Blood must be shed. The mark must be claimed. There could be no turning back. He threw his arms wide and bellowed Khorne's name into the night, his voice raw and ragged, a sound too primal to be called human. In answer, the pit belched a column of fire that illuminated the whole plateau in hellish light. From the darkness beyond the fire, shapes began to emerge. Ghostly figures formed from coiling smoke and ash, bloodletters, hunched and snarling, their blades dripping ethereal gore. They circled Vargosh, mouths full of razored fangs, eyes like coals of pure hatred. One stepped forward, towering above the others, a shadow within shadows. It spoke, though its voice was not heard with the ears, but felt in the marrow, a grinding of black stone against blacker stone. "Will you bear the mark, Wrath?" it asked, each word a thunderclap in Vargosh's skull. Vargosh dropped to one knee, slamming the butt of his axe into the blood-slick ground. "I will," he growled, teeth bared in a savage grin. "I will carry it into the bones of my enemies. I will wear it in their blood and screams." The towering bloodletter raised a taloned hand, and the fire obeyed, writhing upward into a pillar that twisted and coiled into a blasphemous form, Khorne's sacred rune, the skull rune, the symbol of endless murder and insatiable bloodlust. It hovered above Vargosh, pulsing with malevolent life. Without warning, the rune descended. The world became pain. The fire struck Vargosh's chest like a battering ram, punching through flesh and sinew, carving its burning path into his very soul. He screamed, his body arching, muscles knotting in spasms that tore flesh from bone. The heat flensed the skin from his ribs, the scent of his own cooking meat filling his nostrils. Through the veil of agony, he saw his blood boil on the surface of his flesh, saw the skin crack and split as the rune carved itself deep into him, branding not just body, but spirit. Images flared across his mind. Images of endless war, rivers of blood, mountains of skulls, the heavens torn asunder by a single scream of defiance. He saw himself standing atop a broken world, wreathed in flame, axe held high, as gods and mortals alike bowed before him, or burned. The vision shattered, and with it came the final, shattering surge of agony. The runes seared into completion, a blackened, pulsing brand across his chest, still smoking, still hissing like a living thing. It beat in time with his heart, a second heart now, one made of hate and slaughter. The bloodletters around him howled in approval, the sound a cacophony of madness. Vargosh collapsed to the blood-soaked ground, his body a ruin of burnt flesh and exposed muscle. But he laughed, a deep, guttural sound that bubbled up from a place beyond sanity. He felt the power coursing through him, a bottomless well of rage and strength. But with it came the curse. Already he could feel the pull, the gnawing, clawing hunger for violence that would never be sated. His every breath demanded blood. His every thought was stained with the urge to kill, to destroy, to tear and break, until nothing but ruin remained. There could be no peace now, no rest, no mercy. He was a weapon forged anew, a creature of wrath unbound. Slowly, agonizingly, Vargosh rose to his feet, steam rising from his burnt and bleeding body. He raised his axe, feeling its weight anew, and roared his defiance into the blood-drenched sky. The bloodletters vanished like smoke on the wind, leaving him alone on the plateau, alone with the pit, the corpses, and the mark that now defined him. Somewhere, far to the south, beyond mountains that tore the sky, the Firebird stirred, and Vargosh, Bloodseeker, now a vessel of pure, unending fury, began his march toward destiny, toward vengeance, toward flame. Every step he took left bloody footprints that smoldered and sizzled on the broken earth, as if the world itself recoiled from the monster it had birthed. Chapter 4. Across the Wastes. The chaos wastes stretched out before Vargosh like the gaping maw of a dying god, endless, ravenous, and foul beyond mortal comprehension. Each step was a war unto itself. The land shifted and twisted with malign intelligence, mountains melting into rivers of screaming tar, plains rupturing into fields of writhing flesh. The sky above boiled with unnatural colors, bruised purples and sickly greens, constellations bleeding and reforming into shapes too terrible to name. But Vargosh pressed on, a solitary titan of blood and wrath. The mark of wrath burned constantly on his chest, each pulse a call to violence, an anchor against the madness gnawing at the edges of his mind. He had become a living beacon of Khorne's will, and wherever he walked, slaughter soon followed. It was not long before the wastes answered him. The first to challenge him came from the decadent pits of Slaanesh serpentine horrors, with glistening skin stretched taut over rotting bones, their faces shifting between beauty and grotesque mockery. They slithered from a mist of perfumed rot, clutching curved daggers that dripped venomous ichor. They surrounded Vargosh in a ring of whispering voices, promising pleasures unspoken, sweet death and sweeter submission. He answered with his axe. The first creature lunged, moving faster than a striking snake, but Vargosh pivoted, his axe cleaving through its neck in a single brutal arc. The head spun away, spraying black blood that sizzled on the rocks. Another lashed at him with a whip of glistening sinew. He caught it on the haft of his weapon, yanked the creature forward, and drove the axe deep into its gut, ripping it open from pelvis to sternum. The others hesitated, a fatal mistake. Vargosh charged, a howling whirlwind of muscle and iron. He shattered spines, tore limbs from sockets, crushed skulls beneath his iron boots. The horrors of Slaanesh died in gurgling ecstasy, their broken bodies twitching in final, orgasmic death throes. When the last had fallen, Vargosh stood amid the carnage, breathing heavy, his body slick with the foul fluids of his enemies. He spat on the ground, the taste of their false promises bitter on his tongue. The wastes offered no respite. Days later, or what passed for days in a land without true time, he found himself in the rotting lowlands, where the air was a choking miasma and the ground oozed underfoot. Here, the servants of Nurgle made their lairs, bloated and festering with disease and despair. From the mist, they shambled toward him, plague-bearers, grotesque parodies of life, their bellies split open to reveal swarming nests of maggots, their hands clutching rusted, dripping swords. Their laughter was a wet, bubbling sound that set Vargosh's teeth on edge. He charged headlong into their ranks. Their swords bit into him, leaving trails of seeping corruption, but the mark of wrath flared hot, burning away the taint before it could take hold. Vargosh's axe sang a brutal song, carving through rotting flesh with meaty, wet sounds. He tore the horned head from one plague-bearer, stamped another into a puddle of pus with a crunch of snapping bone. Still they came, relentless, grinning in their mindless devotion. Vargosh fought like a god of war incarnate, unyielding and furious. He hacked off limbs, ripped out throats with his bare hands, crushed skulls under the heel of his blood-caked boots. Every death fueled him, each act of slaughter feeding the roaring inferno inside him. At last, only silence remained, and a field of dismembered, dissolving corpses. Through the rotting mists, others began to emerge, not daemons, but men. Broken, feral, barely clinging to sanity, these were the lost blood retrievers, mortal warriors who had once served Khorne with fanatical zeal, now scattered and leaderless, surviving by slaughter and savagery. They approached warily, drawn by the stench of blood and the towering figure who had laid waste to the demonic hordes. Vargosh stood tall, planting the butt of his axe into the gore-soaked ground. His chest was bare, save for the blackened rune of Khorne that pulsed with brutal light, casting a baleful glow over the scene. "Who among you remembers honor?" he growled, his voice a grinding avalanche of rage. "Who among you dares to follow wrath made flesh?" The blood reavers knelt, one by one, their heads bowed, fists pounding the earth in crude salute. They needed no speeches, no empty promises. In the wastes, strength was law, and Vargosh had proven himself its unchallenged master. They became his warband, the Broken Fang, a tide of killers and madmen reforged by fire and blood. Together, they marched across the wastes, leaving a trail of ruin in their wake, bound by a single unbreakable purpose: to seek the Firebird, to seize its flaming heart, and to become a weapon that would burn the world itself. And as they marched, Vargosh could feel the Firebird's pull growing stronger, a tug at the soul, a promise of unimaginable fury yet to be unleashed. The wastes trembled before them, for a new storm had been born, a storm of blood, of iron, and of wrath eternal. Chapter 5. The Witch of Ashfan. Ashen was a place forgotten even by the wastes. The sky above it was a vast bruise of black and purple, swirling eternally with choking clouds. A pale, sickly rain fell from above, not water but a viscous, sticky fluid that reeked of burnt bone and rotting meat. The ground was a field of cracked ash, shifting treacherously underfoot, like old scabs torn anew with every step. Vargosh and the Broken Fang approached the remnants of Ashfen with weapons drawn, warily eyeing the skeletal ruins that jutted from the ash like the rib bones of some colossal, long-dead beast. The air was heavy with a stifling presence, a wrongness that made the blood itch beneath the skin. Within the crumbling carcass of a once proud fortress, something stirred. Vargosh pushed ahead, the rune of wrath on his chest pulsing with growing heat. His axe, dulled and notched from countless slaughters, hungered for fresh blood. Yet there was no enemy here, no hordes to hack down, no demonic monstrosities to carve apart. Only Erd. At the heart of the ruin, seated atop a throne fashioned from fused skulls and melted iron, was the Witch of Ashfen. She was a ragged thing, wrapped in tattered veils and cloaks woven from the skin of the damned. Her body was thin, emaciated to the point of breaking, but her presence was colossal, filling the shattered hall with an oppressive dread. Her hair was a mass of filthy, matted cords, writhing as if alive, and from the sockets where her eyes should have been, dark smoke poured ceaselessly. She smelled of ancient death, of things buried deep and unearthed too soon. When she spoke, her voice was not a sound but a pressure inside the skull, a dry rasp scraping against the bones of thought. You seek the Firebird," she croaked. Vargosh did not flinch. He stood tall amidst the ash and ruin, his warband arrayed behind him like a pack of slavering wolves. "I seek to claim it," he growled, tightening his grip on his axe. "Guide me, or be torn apart." The Witch of Ashfen laughed, a sound like the cracking of frozen corpses. "You are marked, Bloodseeker. Marked by wrath, cursed to endless slaughter. Yet you are blind still, groping in darkness." Smoke billowed from her mouth as she leaned forward, her broken fingers scratching furrows into the skulls beneath her. "You cannot find the Firebird," she hissed, "not while the Black Wolf still lives." Vargosh's lip curled in a snarl. "Name him, point me to him, and I will carve his heart out." The witch shook her head, a slow, jerking motion, like a puppet on snapped strings. "Who are you? You must find him yourself. Hunt him through the cinder wastes, through the bones of fallen empires. Slay him beneath the eye of the burning moon, and only then will the Firebird reveal itself." She rose from her throne, her body spasming violently, joints popping in grotesque dislocation. As she stood, the ruins trembled, dust cascading from the cracked stones. With a skeletal hand, she gestured to the far side of the fortress, a massive doorway, its surface scorched black, etched with the rune of corn clawed into it by desperate hands. Beyond it, only darkness beckoned. Varg stepped forward, but the witch was not done. "Beware, Bloodseeker," she whispered, smoke coiling from her mouth and drifting across the ash. "The Black Wolf is not merely a foe, he is the shadow of your soul. To slay him is to slay yourself." Vargosh laughed, the sound raw and savage. "I have no soul left," he said, his voice a rumble of pure hatred. "Only wrath." With that, he turned his back on the witch, striding through the broken gate without hesitation. His warband followed, their blood-stained boots stirring the ash into foul clouds. Behind them, the Witch of Ashfen cackled and screamed, her laughter echoing through the ruins, a jagged symphony of madness and prophecy. Above Ashfen, the burning moon clawed its way higher into the festering sky, casting long, twisted shadows. Far across the waste, something howled, a long, keening wail of fury and loss, rising to meet the Bloodseeker's challenge. Chapter 6. The Black Wolf. The cinder wastes stretched ahead like a sea of broken teeth. A desolation where the very air burned the lungs and every stone seemed to bleed beneath the light of the bloodied moon. The sun here was a dull ember behind the smog-choked sky, casting a corpse light over the shattered remains of ancient battles. And it was here that the Black Wolf reigned. Vargosh and his warband crested a ridge of jagged obsidian, their boots crunching through brittle bones and flakes of black ash. Before them, rising like a malignant tumor from the dead earth, loomed the Fortress of Skulls. It was a monstrous thing, a cyclopean structure built from the piled remains of countless victims. Skulls of men, beasts, demons, and things unnameable were mortared together with dried blood and crumbling sinew. Great spiked towers speared the polluted sky, draped in banners of flayed skin that fluttered in the blistering wind. Rivers of blood trickled down the slopes, feeding fetid pits where the dead were tossed and forgotten. Atop the highest parapet stood a figure, massive, encased in black iron and crimson mail, crowned with a snarling helm of snarled horns and jagged steel. His very presence distorted the air around him, warping it with a palpable aura of hate. Lord Karzul, the Black Wolf, warlord of the bloodthirster cult known as the Crimson Maw. Vargosh's hands tightened on the haft of his axe, the mark of wrath on his chest searing his flesh anew. The prophecy of the witch gnawed at him, a worm in the belly of his mind. Slay him. Slay yourself. The broken fang gathered at his back, muttering oaths and sharpening their weapons. They could smell blood in the air, taste the battle to come. Vargosh raised his axe high, its blade still blackened and chipped from his endless crusade. Tonight we tear the heart from the Black Wolf, he roared, his voice carrying across the blasted plain. We rip down his throne of skulls and crown ourselves with his death. The warband howled their assent, pounding weapons against shields and armor, a thunderous drumbeat of promised slaughter. The fortress responded in kind. Horns forged from bone and brass sounded from within the walls. The great iron gates groaned open, and from within poured Karzul's war horde, a tide of mutated blood reversers, armored cultists daubed in sacrificial runes, and demonic beasts stitched from war flesh and iron. The two forces collided at the foot of the fortress in a cataclysm of carnage. Vargosh led the charge, his axe reaping a bloody harvest. He smashed through a wall of snarling cultists, severing limbs and heads with brutal sweeps. His warband fought like rabid animals, their weapons hacking, thrusting, tearing, every motion a hymn to the blood god. A behemoth of twisted brass and sinew, a juggernaut of corn, its rider clad in spiked plate, barreled toward Vargosh, trampling warriors underfoot. Vargosh sidestepped with the grace of a seasoned killer, planting his axe deep into the creature's flank. The beast bellowed, hot blood spraying in a torrent as Vargosh wrenched the blade free and slammed it into the rider's neck, snapping the vertebrae with a wet crunch. Through the maelstrom, he caught glimpses of Karzul, the Black Wolf, descending from his parapet, each step of his iron-shod boots leaving cracks in the stones. His weapon was a massive war scythe, its blade forged from the fangs of daemons, its edge alive, with a writhing crimson light. Kalu moved like a storm of iron and hate, scything down his own warriors and Vargosh's alike, uncaring of allegiance, a true avatar of Khorne's creed. Kill, maim, burn. Vargosh roared a challenge, shoving aside a blood reaver who gurgled in protest as Vargosh's gauntlet crushed his windpipe. He advanced toward the warlord, leaving a trail of corpses in his wake. At last the two collided. Karzul struck first, his war scythe whistling through the air with bone-shearing speed. Vargosh barely ducked the first sweep, the blade slicing a lock of hair from his scalp. He retaliated with a brutal overhand chop, but Karzul caught the axe on the haft of his scythe, the clash ringing out like a temple bell cracked by a siege stone. They circled one another, predators locked in a dance of death. Vargosh fainted low, then surged forward, ramming his shoulder into Karzul's chest. The warlord staggered, and Vargosh seized the opening, raining down a flurry of savage strikes. Sparks and blood sprayed with each impact, steel biting into blackened iron. But Cahill was no common foe. With a bellow, he slammed the butt of his scythe into Vargosh's gut, lifting him from his feet. Before Vargosh could recover, Harazul grabbed him by the throat and hurled him through a shattered wall, stone exploding outward as Vargosh's body crashed through. Pain flared in his shattered ribs, but he rose, blood streaming from his mouth, the mark on his chest glowing brighter, feeding him strength drawn from endless wrath. Harazul strode toward him, laughing, a deep, terrible sound that shook the very stones. "You come to challenge me, whelp," he thundered. "I am the Black Wolf, I am the Hand of Corn, you are nothing." Vargosh wiped the blood from his mouth and grinned, a savage, broken thing. "I am the end of you," he snarled. They clashed again with bone-breaking force. The duel raged across the battlefield, through shattered gates and burning ruins. Flesh tore, bones shattered, blood sprayed in arterial fountains. Harazul scored a deep gash across Vargosh's shoulder, severing muscle to the bone. In return, Vargosh buried his axe in Harazul's thigh, feeling the grating of metal against bone. They fought with a ferocity that defied mortal limits, each seeking to utterly annihilate the other. Finally, Vargosh saw his chance. Feigning a stumble, he let Harazul lunge forward, overextending, driven by rage. With a roar, Vargosh sidestepped and buried his axe in Harazul's exposed side, driving it deep. He ripped it free in a shower of black blood, then swung again, and again, each strike reducing the once mighty warlord to a bleeding ruin. Harazul dropped to his knees, his war scythe clattering to the ground. Vargosh seized him by the horns of his helm and tore it from his head, revealing a face twisted by fury and disbelief. Without hesitation, Vargosh drove his axe through Harazul's skull, cleaving it in two with a meaty crack. The Black Wolf was no more. Vargosh stood over the corpse, his chest heaving, blood dripping from every inch of his ravaged body. He raised the severed helm high, and the broken fang howled in triumph. The Fortress of Skulls belonged to him now. The mark of wrath flared so brightly on his chest that it illuminated the whole battlefield, casting long, twitching shadows over the dead and the dying. Far above, the burning moon pulsed, and somewhere beyond the horizon, the Firebird screamed. Vargosh bared his teeth in a blood-smeared grin. The path was clearing. The hunt would continue, and the world would burn. Chapter 7. Siege of Skulls. The Fortress of Skulls brooded under a sky choked with smoke and bleeding clouds, its towers of bone and blackened iron looming against the dying light like a desecrated shrine. The air reeked of rot and charred flesh, every gust of wind carrying the stench of 1,000 deaths. Vargosh stood at the base of the hill, his axe slung across his back, his fists clenching and unclenching with barely restrained fury. Around him, the Broken Fang gathered in snarling, restless packs, their weapons slick with old blood, their eyes gleaming with savage anticipation. The Black Wolf's death had thrown the fortress into chaos. Without Harazul's iron grip to hold them, the garrison turned on itself. Rival cultists, half-mad blood reviewers, and daemon-touched beasts falling into internecine slaughter. But Vargosh knew better than to assume weakness. Cornered animals were often the most dangerous. He would not waste this moment. The scent of blood in the air was thick enough to taste, metallic, hot, maddening. Tonight, the Fortress of Skulls would fall. Vargosh raised his axe high, the mark of wrath on his chest searing against his flesh with each heartbeat. "Break the gates!" he roared, his voice carrying across the blasted plain like a cannon blast. "Tear down their walls, paint their altars with their own guts." The Broken Fang answered with a deafening roar, pounding their weapons against shields and armor, a thunderous rhythm that shook the cracked earth. Without hesitation, Vargosh led the charge. They stormed uphill, a tidal wave of iron, flesh, and rage. The defenders atop the ramparts scrambled to respond, their disorganized ranks firing black-fletched arrows and hurling crude, spiked javelins into the onrushing horde. Dozens of Vargosh's warriors fell, skewered or smashed down, but their deaths only fueled the blood frenzy. Vargosh moved like a force of nature. He battered aside a boulder hurled from a mangonel, the stone shattering against his shield, and hurled a throwing axe that embedded itself in the throat of a gunner atop the wall. At the main gate, a towering monstrosity of splintered bone and rusted iron, bound with chains, he drove his forces into a brutal wedge. Warhammers and crude battering rams crashed against the gates, each blow sending tremors through the fortress. Defenders appeared above the gate, pouring cauldrons of boiling blood down upon the attackers. Screams tore the air as men were scalded alive, flesh sloughing from their bones. But still the broken fang pressed forward, climbing over the dying, trampling the fallen. With a wordless roar, Vargosh seized a fallen banner pole and drove it into the base of the gate, using it as a lever. Muscles bulged and tore under his ravaged skin as he forced the pole deeper, wood splintering, iron groaning under the pressure. The gate cracked, once, twice, and then with a shuddering scream of tortured metal, it collapsed inward. Vargosh was the first through the breach. Inside the fortress was a slaughterhouse. Cultists in spiked armor and shrieking madmen armed with hooked blades surged forward to meet the attackers. War cries and bellows of rage clashed with the wet, meaty sounds of blades biting into flesh. Vargosh hacked down the first opponent he met, splitting the man from collarbone to pelvis with a single stroke. Blood sprayed his face, hot and thick, but he did not pause. He ripped the axe free, pivoted, and buried it into the chest of another shrieking cultist, lifting the man off the ground with the force of the blow. The broken fang followed in his wake, a tide of murder. They slammed into the defenders, hacking and tearing, fighting with the savage desperation of those who had nothing left to lose. The courtyards became charnel pits. Blood pooled ankle-deep, steaming in the cold air. Severed limbs and ruptured organs floated like grotesque offerings to an uncaring god. Vargosh fought his way to the central keep, where the last remnants of Khazul's lieutenants gathered, bloated war champions clad in demon-wrought armor, their flesh merging with their war gear, their faces hidden behind snarling visors. They stood, shoulder to shoulder atop a stairway of bleached skulls, the entrance to the inner sanctum behind them. Vargosh did not slow. He met the first champion with a howl of pure wrath, swinging his axe in a brutal arc that the enemy barely deflected. Sparks showered the air, and the force of the blow staggered the champion back a step. The warlord countered with a spiked mace, a monstrous thing designed to pulp flesh and shatter bone. Vargosh ducked the swing, felt the wind of it rip past his head, and drove his shoulder into the champion's gut, forcing him back. They struggled atop the slick stairs, grappling like beasts. Vargosh bellowed and slammed the butt of his axe into the warlord's knee with a sickening crack, dropping him to one leg. Without hesitation, he brought the axe down, again and again, hacking at the exposed neck until he severed the head, sending it tumbling down the steps. The remaining champions charged, roaring oaths to Khorne. Vargosh met them all. The battle was a blur of blood and agony. His axe bit into one champion's side, splitting armor and ribs alike. A hammer smashed against his back, sending him sprawling, but he rolled with the impact, rising with a snarl to carve the legs from under his attacker. Blows rained upon him, crushing, bruising, breaking, but the mark of wrath burned hotter, feeding him strength, refusing to let him fall. One by one, the defenders died, screaming. When the Vlast fell, choking on his own blood, Vargosh stood alone atop the stairs, surrounded by the broken bodies of his enemies. The inner sanctum lay before him, the heart of the Fortress of Skulls. The Broken Fang rallied around their leader, dragging wounded comrades behind them, grinning through blood-streaked faces. Vargosh raised his axe high once more, and the warband roared their triumph to the polluted sky. The fortress was theirs. Its altars, its treasures, its rivers of blood, all now belonged to Vargosh, Bloodseeker, Lord of the Broken Fang. And far to the south, beyond the bones of dead mountains and rivers of fire, the Firebird stirred once more, its cry of fury carried on the burning winds. Vargosh smiled, a terrible, broken thing. The world would drown in blood, and he would ride the crimson tide to his destiny. Chapter 8. Slaying the Wolf. The great hall of the Fortress of Skulls seethed with bloodlust and the heavy stink of burnt flesh. Crude torches made from femurs and strips of fat-fed cloth guttered along the walls, casting long, quivering shadows. At the center of it all, upon a throne of welded bone and iron, sat the Black Wolf himself, Lord Karzul, returned from the inner sanctum, his war scythe resting across his knees. His crimson armor was blackened with old blood, the snarling visage of a demon howling from his breastplate. His helm, crowned with twisted horns, was discarded at the foot of the throne, revealing a brutal face carved from scar tissue and rage. Eyes like pits of burning coal locked onto Vargosh as the Bloodseeker strode into the hall. Behind Vargosh came the Broken Fang, battered but unbowed from the siege. Gorvak, his oldest brother in blood, stood nearest to him. Hefting a massive cleaver, his bald head slick with sweat and blood. The gathered remnants of Karazul's warband howled in frenzy, hammering their weapons against the ground in a thunderous, deafening rhythm. They smelled the challenge, the deathly dance about to unfold. Vargosh pointed his axe at Karazul, the blade still dripping. "You have fallen, Black Wolf," he growled, voice echoing through the blood-slick hole. "Your fortress is broken. Your warriors bow to me or die. You are nothing but meat now." Karazul rose slowly, rolling his thick neck with a sound like grinding stones. "You presume much, whelp," he spat, voice thick with contempt. "But you forget, only death decides who rules. Come then, let Khorne judge us." Without waiting for a formal signal, Karazul lifted his war scythe and charged. The impact was cataclysmic. He screamed against steel as axe met scythe in a shower of sparks. The force of the blow drove Vargosh back a step, boots skidding across gore-slick stone. He snarled and retaliated, swinging his axe in a brutal, arcing chop aimed at Karazul's exposed ribs. The Black Wolf twisted aside with surprising speed, the axe shearing a deep gouge in his side but failing to fell him. Gerhard drew his blast weapon, swinging the war scythe's hook blade, slicing a ribbon of flesh from Vargosh's forearm. Blood fountained, but Vargosh ignored the pain, driving forward, battering at Karazul with hammering blows meant to break shield and bone alike. The two champions wove a tapestry of death, circling and striking, slipping and bleeding, a grim ballet of murder in Khorne's dark honor. Around them the Bloodreavers bayed and bellowed, pounding the earth with their weapons, a deafening chant rising. Blood, blood, blood. Gorvak fought to keep the Broken Fang from being overwhelmed by Karazul's surviving loyalists, who surged forward to intervene. Roaring like a beast, Gorvak met them with his cleaver, hacking down two in a single sweep, his body a whirlwind of brutality. The battle around the duel grew into a chaotic storm, warriors locked in vicious close-quarters slaughter, knives flashing, blood splattering across the cracked flagstones. But in the center of it all, the world narrowed to two figures, Vargosh and Karazul. Karihol drove forward, catching Vargosh with the butt of his scythe in the gut. The impact forced air from Vargosh's lungs in a ragged grunt, but he twisted the pain into fury, grabbing the scythe's haft and yanking Karihol toward him. Face to face, teeth bared in snarling grimaces, they exchanged a flurry of brutal, close-in strikes, fists hammering, knees slamming into ribs, the clash of armor and bone. Vargosh found an opening. His axe bit deep into Khazul's thigh, severing tendons and bone with a wet, meaty crack. Khazul staggered, howling his rage. But even wounded, the Black Wolf was a monster. With a roar, Khazul drove his war scythe in a savage upward arc, the daemon-forged blade punching through Vargosh's side, slicing deep into muscle and scraping rib. Blood gushed from the wound, hot and steaming. Varta screamed, a raw, primal sound that seemed to shake the very stones, and he struck. He drove his forehead into Khazul's face, shattering the warlord's nose in a spray of blood and cartilage. Khazul reeled, stunned for a heartbeat too long. Vargosh seized the moment. He wrenched his axe high, both hands gripping the haft, and brought it down with every ounce of strength, fury, and raw hate he possessed. The blade struck Khazul's collarbone, splitting it with a wet, cracking noise. Vargosh drove it deeper, splitting armor, flesh, and bone, cleaving down through the heart. Lord Khazul shuddered, a guttural rattle escaping his ruined throat. Vargosh twisted the axe and tore it free in an eruption of gore. The Black Wolf collapsed to his knees, blood gushing from the ruin of his chest. He reached out once, as if to grasp Vargosh, but his fingers spasmed and fell limp. With a final snarling roar, Vargosh swung again, severing Khazul's head from his shoulders. The severed head bounced down the steps, leaving a trail of black blood. For a moment, silence reigned. Then, the warband erupted. The broken fang roared in triumph, bellowing oaths to Khorne, while Khazul's surviving warriors, faced with their master's death, dropped their weapons or fell to their knees in submission. Victory was his. The fortress of skulls was his. But victory came at a price. Through the haze of blood and triumph, Vargosh saw Gorvak fall. His brother in blood had fought through a knot of enemy champions, carving a red path to Vargosh's side. But a Black Wolf loyalist, a hulking beast of a man wielding a cruel hooked blade, had driven the weapon deep into Gorvak's gut and ripped upward, spilling his entrails onto the blood. Vargosh bellowed Gorvak's name and charged, cleaving the assassin in half with a single blow. He dropped to Gorvak's side, cradling his brother's ruined body. Gorvak grinned through a mouthful of blood, teeth stained red. "Looks like you won, brother," he rasped. Vargosh pressed a hand to the gaping wound, but it was useless. There was too much blood, too much broken inside. "Hold on," Vargosh snarled. "You'll see it. You'll see the Firebird with me." Gorvak laughed, a bubbling, dying sound. "Already see it," he whispered, eyes glazing over, "already burning, burning so bright." His hand found Vargosh's forearm, squeezed once, and then fell away, lifeless. Vargosh threw his head back and roared, the sound a jagged thing of grief and rage that shook the fortress. The blood god demanded sacrifice. Even in victory, there was only loss. Vargosh rose, blood steaming on his armor, the severed head of Khazul hanging from his hand. The broken fang knelt before him. The fortress was his, but the fire that drove him burned hotter, more furious now, fueled by the death of the one warrior he had called brother. The Firebird awaited, and it would burn brighter than ever before. Chapter 9. Fire in the Sky. The Fortress of Skulls lay under a heavy, suffocating darkness. Smoke rose from its sundered battlements, the air thick with the metallic stench of fresh blood and the greasy black reek of burnt flesh. Pits of fire burned low amid the wreckage of battle, their sickly glow painting the crumbling towers in hues of red and orange. Vargosh stood atop the highest rampart, silent, his massive frame silhouetted against the churning, bruised sky. His battered armor was still slick with gore, the mark of wrath on his chest throbbing visibly, as if it shared the beat of a second, monstrous heart. Below him, the remnants of the broken fang toiled like carrion crows, dragging the dead into heaps, stacking skulls into new shrines to honor the blood god. Their chants rose into the smoky air, hoarse, savage hymns of victory and death, but Vargosh barely heard them. His eyes were locked on the heavens. The night sky above the wastes had always been a turbulent, hateful thing, a roiling mass of unnatural stars and gaping maws that blinked and wept blood. But now it changed. A crack formed high above, a wound torn across the sky itself. And through that wound came fire. A comet, burning with the color of molten gold and fresh spilled blood, tore across the heavens, leaving a searing trail behind it. The sky screamed as the comet passed, a keening, raw sound that shivered in the bones of every living thing below. Its tail was a living inferno, writhing like the serpents of the pit, and where it passed the clouds themselves caught fire, raining down embers and ash. The comet's light fell upon the fortress of skulls, bathing the broken stones in its apocalyptic glow. The broken fang dropped to their knees, shielding their eyes, howling their awe and terror. But Vargosh did not kneel. The light of the comet washed over him, casting his blood-slick armor into a blazing, infernal brilliance. The rune of corn on his chest flared, searing a brand of agony into his flesh so intense he staggered back a step, his vision swimming with blood and flame. Visions gripped him, wild, consuming. He saw a mountain of fire, crowned with a vast storm of burning wings. He heard the howling of a creature so immense, so saturated with rage and fury that even gods would turn their eyes away. He saw himself standing before it, arms outstretched, bathed in blood and flame. The Firebird stirred. The prophecy was true. A force like a tidal wave of molten iron crashed into Vargosh's soul, and he staggered to one knee, snarling against the pain. He bit down on his own lip until blood flooded his mouth, grounding himself against the overwhelming tide of vision and fury. When at last the burning comet vanished beyond the horizon, leaving only a scorched scar across the heavens, the world fell into a stunned, fearful silence. Vargosh rose, breathing heavily, every muscle in his body trembling with the aftershock. He turned to face the broken fang, who stared at him with wide, fever-bright eyes. The fear was plain in them, fear not of death, not of the comet, but of him. He had stood beneath the fury of the sky and risen stronger, untouched. He was no longer merely their leader. He was something more. Vargosh raised his axe, the blade catching the lingering light of the burning sky, and pointed southward, toward the distant horizon where volcanoes belched fire into the firmament, where legends said the Firebird made its lair. "South," he growled, his voice carrying like a stone thrown into a black pool. "To Mount Kazaroth, to the Firebird." The broken fang howled in unison, slamming weapons against shields, a sound of absolute devotion or terror. Without another word, Vargosh descended from the ramparts, blood-caked boots thudding heavily on the stones. His warband fell into place behind him, a tide of violence and loyalty ready to drown the world. The comet's trail still burned in the sky, a jagged, bleeding line pointing the way. And the Firebird waited, its heart a furnace of hate and fury, beating in time with the Bloodseeker's own. The hunt had truly begun. Chapter 10. The Shattered Realms. The Shattered Realms greeted them with a scream. Not a mortal sound, but a deep, tearing wail that rose from the land itself, as if the very earth bled and wept. Vargosh led the broken fangs southward, chasing the burning trail left by the comet, into a nightmare landscape where even reality had been torn asunder by ancient wars between gods and demons. Here, the ground was a broken mirror of existence. Jagged shards of land floated in the air, suspended by unseen forces. Rivers of molten blood flowed uphill, mountains twisted into spirals, their peaks forever out of reach, while forests grew upside down, their roots clawing at a sky bruised with storm and madness. Every step was a battle against the land itself. Vargosh pushed forward with a will carved from slaughter and searing pain, the mark of wrath thrumming on his chest like a second, monstrous heartbeat. His warband followed, driven by fear, faith, and the promise of bloodshed beyond imagining. The first to greet them were the Hollow Men. They rose from the broken plains, shapes of desiccated flesh stretched thin over brittle bone, their faces featureless masks of waxy skin, mouths hanging open in eternal, soundless howls. Once, long ago, they had been warriors, tribes, entire nations swallowed by the wars of chaos. Now they were nothing but echoes of hate, bound to the cursed soil. They fell upon the broken thing without warning. The battle was vicious and immediate. Hollowmen moved like smoke given cruel purpose, their limbs bending and twisting in impossible ways. Their clawed hands raked across flesh, leaving wounds that bled shadows rather than blood. Vargosh met them head-on, his axe a roaring storm of death. The first Hollowman to reach him was cleaved in half from crown to crotch, its insides spilling into the dust like black mist. Another tried to latch onto his back, but Vargosh caught it by the throat, crushed its neck with a single savage squeeze, and hurled the twitching corpse into a knot of its kin. The broken fang fought like madmen, their weapons singing in the broken air. Blood reavers hacked and tore with axes, maces, and clawed gauntlets, grunting and cursing as they battled not just bodies, but the memories of hate-made flesh. Yet for every Hollowman slain, another rose from the shifting, fractured ground. Vargosh knew they could not afford a war of attrition. He roared over the din of battle, his voice cutting through chaos like a blade. "Break their hearts," he bellowed. "Break the land itself." With renewed fury he drove forward, aiming not at the Hollowmen, but at the ground from which they spawned. His axe smashed through the brittle crust of the earth, releasing geysers of foul black energy. Hollowmen shrieked soundlessly, disintegrating as the cracks widened, the source of their existence undone. The broken fang followed his example, tearing at the land, collapsing the broken reality that sustained the spirits. In time the Hollowmen faded, leaving only the stinking mist of their passing. But there was no respite. As they pressed deeper into the shattered realms, reality itself grew ever more hostile. Storms of razors fell from the skies without warning, shredding flesh and armor alike. Rivers of glass slithered across the plains like hunting beasts, their edges slicing through anything that dared cross them. Time fractured. One night they camped beneath the ruins of a twisted monument, an enormous petrified skull crowned with horns that spiraled into eternity. Vargosh slept fitfully, his dreams choked with visions of burning wings and screaming mountains. When he woke, half his warband was missing, swallowed by folds in time that had simply blinked them out of existence. New warriors had taken their place, strange, bestial men who swore fealty to Khorne with scarred tongues and bloody oaths. Warriors who knew nothing of their journey, yet bore the mark of wrath burned into their flesh. Vargosh accepted them without question. The wastes provided, the wastes took. All that mattered was the hunt. Further south, the landscape changed again. Vast chasms yawned like open mouths, and pillars of burning bone jutted from the ground. Creatures of nightmare stalked the edges of vision, Beasts of blood and wire, their bodies stitched from hatred and agony, their eyes black wells of endless hunger. One night, as the blood moon rose swollen and furious over the broken mountains, Vargosh found himself standing at the edge of a vast, broken canyon. Across its depths stretched a bridge of screaming souls, an impossible span woven from the twisting, agonized bodies of the damned. Their faces bubbled from the surface like boils, weeping blood and pleading for release. Vargosh stepped onto the bridge without hesitation. The souls wailed beneath his boots, their lamentations rising to a deafening crescendo. His warriors hesitated, but his glare, burning, savage, spurred them on. Step by brutal step they crossed, battered by winds that whispered secrets of failure and doom. On the far side, Vargosh turned back and watched as the bridge crumbled into nothingness behind them, as if their very passage had sealed their fate. The Firebird's pull grew stronger with every league. Vargosh could feel it now, thrumming in the marrow of his bones, a hunger that eclipsed even his own bottomless rage. The shattered realms sought to break him, but Vargosh was no mere mortal. He was the storm made flesh, the fury that would never die. Southward he marched, a black titan crowned in blood, and behind him trailed a warband that had become something more than human, a host of slaughter incarnate, bound to a destiny written in fire and screams. And ahead, through the poisoned mists and burning storms, Mount Kazaroth loomed, a black mountain crowned in endless fire, where the Firebird awaited the final reckoning. Chapter 11. Echoes of the Past. The ruins clawed at the horizon like the broken fingers of a dead god. Once, long ago, this place had been a city, mighty and proud, crowned with towers of black marble and obsidian, strong enough to defy even the earliest incursions of chaos. Now it lay sundered, a rotting carcass abandoned to the madness of the wastes. Great spires lay toppled like shattered bones, streets were split by yawning chasms, and a sickly mist clung to everything like the shroud of a forgotten corpse. Vargosh marched at the head of the broken fang, the mark of wrath burning hotter with each step. Around him the ruins whispered, 1,000 voices murmuring in languages older than sanity, their words threading through the cracked air like maggots through meat. Ahead, the gates of the city loomed, twin monoliths, cracked but still standing, engraved with endless spirals of skulls. As Vargosh passed beneath them, the mist thickened, swallowing the world in gray oblivion. The first of the echoes appeared without warning. A figure stepped from the mist, armor gleaming with the dying light of past glories. He was massive, encased in gilded plate that had long since tarnished to the color of old blood. His helm was crowned with blackened horns, and from his back streamed a tattered banner depicting a crimson phoenix wreathed in chains. Vargosh halted, his axe sliding into his hands by instinct. The figure spoke, voice hollow, as though echoing up from the bottom of a tomb. "Turn back, Bloodseeker," it intoned. "Beyond lies only ruin. The Firebird does not grant glory, only the death of all you are." Vargosh snarled, baring his teeth. "Only cowards speak of ruin," he growled, advancing. "Only the weak fear death." He swung his axe in a brutal, rising arc. The blade should have bitten into flesh, should have shattered bone, but the figure was no mortal thing. It blurred, a ghostly shimmer, and Vargosh's axe passed harmlessly through it. The spectre countered with a blow of its own, a downward cleave from a sword crackling with spectral flame. Though insubstantial, the weapon bit into Vargosh's mind rather than flesh, a searing agony that burst behind his eyes. He staggered, snarling in fury, and the echo faded back into the mist. The broken fang closed ranks around him, weapons drawn, faces pale beneath their grime and blood. But more echoes came. They materialized from the mist-like spirits vomiting forth from the grave, a procession of warriors, each scarred by battle, each bearing the rune of corn scorched onto their armor or flesh. Men and monsters alike, a beastman lord with twin axes of fire, a daemon warped warpriest with molten chains wrapped around his arms, a scarred champion riding a horse with 8 burning eyes. Each carried the same warning, the same promise of doom. Each attacked. The battle became a fever dream. Vargosh hurled himself into the fray, roaring wordless defiance. His axe tore through phantom bodies, spraying not blood, but searing sparks of agony that scorched his mind with every kill. His warriors fought beside him, hacking and bellowing, but their blades passed through more often than they struck, their enemies as insubstantial as smoke, yet as deadly as steel. A clawed hand, formed from the memories of 10,000 dying screams, raked across Vargosh's chest, searing the flesh around the mark of wrath. He lashed out, cleaving through the mist, only for the ghost to reform behind him, hissing laughter that curdled the air. They were fighting the past itself, and the past did not die easily. Gorvak's face swam before Vargosh's eyes, bloody and broken, mouth whispering a name he could not bear to hear. Vargosh struck at it with a snarl, shattering the vision, but more came. Faces of the red fangs he had failed to save, faces of the broken fang who had died screaming during the siege. Their accusations were silent, but their weapons were not. Pain racked his body, but Vargosh did not yield. He was the Bloodseeker. He was rage incarnate. Every blow he suffered only fed the furnace of his fury, and he answered with the brutality of a force of nature. A hulking echo, a warlord clad in obsidian armor stitched with veins of screaming souls, swung a hammer the size of a cartwheel at him. Vargosh ducked under the crushing blow, drove his axe up under the thing's chin, and ripped through ghost flesh with a roar of effort. The hammer fell from spectral fingers and burst into nothingness. Around him his warriors fell to their knees, weeping blood, clutching at their heads as the echoes pressed harder, drowning them in guilt and fear. Vargosh planted his feet, raised his axe high, and bellowed a single word that ripped through the mist like a thunderclap. Enough. The mark of wrath exploded with crimson light, casting searing waves of hate in all directions. The mist recoiled, and the echoes shrieked, their forms unraveling like smoke in a gale. One by one, they dissolved, their warnings fading into silence. The mist thinned, and the ruined city stood silent once more. Vargosh stood amidst the wreckage, panting, blood streaming from his nose and mouth, every inch of him trembling with exhausted rage. Around him the broken fangs slowly rose, faces hollow, bodies broken, but breathing. They had survived the echoes of the past, but their warning clung to the air like the stench of rot. The Firebird would not be a prize easily claimed. It was not a creature of mere flame and fury. It was a crucible, a final trial that would either remake him into something greater or annihilate everything he was. Vargosh spat blood into the dust and shouldered his axe. Southward lay Mount Kazaroth. Southward burned destiny. And Vargosh, Bloodseeker, would not falter. Not now. Not ever. Chapter 12. The Blooded Path. Beyond the ruins, the land grew cruel. The Blooded Path was no road. It was a wound carved deep into the flesh of the world, a corridor of jagged cliffs and smoking fissures that pulsed and shifted like living tissue. The ground beneath Vargosh's boots cracked with every step, seeping black ichor and the putrid stench of ancient decay. The sky above was a permanent whirlpool of rust-colored clouds, spitting acidic rain that hissed against steel and burned exposed flesh. Each step forward was a battle. Vargosh marched at the head of what remained of the broken fang, their numbers already thin from the horrors of the shattered realms. Those who survived were no longer merely men. They were creatures of blood and hate, hardened by endless violence, their eyes hollow save for the burning embers of devotion. The path tested them immediately. The first trap was almost invisible, a pit lined with iron spikes, disguised beneath a shifting skin of ash and bone dust. The first man to stumble into it did so with a shriek, his body punctured a dozen times before he could even draw breath. Vargosh heard the crack of shattered ribs, the wet gurgle of blood filling lungs, and without slowing, ordered the others forward. There was no time for mercy. Weakness was the greatest betrayal. Further down the canyon, the cliffs themselves betrayed them. Great slabs of rock sheared loose without warning, crashing down in avalanches that turned men into pulp and shattered bones into powder. A pair of warriors, brothers by blood and oath, were flattened beneath a fall that buried them in a mound of broken stone and mangled iron. The survivors grew quieter, harder. Every death fueled the fire in their guts, honed their rage to a keener edge. But it was the beasts that truly thinned them. From fissures in the canyon walls came things of nightmare, creatures stitched from raw sinew and gnashing bone, with too many mouths and too many eyes, their movements spasmodic and wrong. They attacked in packs, drawn by the scent of blood and madness, their screeches flaying the mind as surely as their claws shredded flesh. The first beast slammed into a squad of blood-reavers with the force of a catapult stone. Men were torn apart like dolls, arms ripped free, skulls popped like rotten fruit. One warrior was dragged screaming into a cleft in the earth, his howls silenced with a wet, crunching noise that echoed down the canyon. Vargosh hurled himself into the fray with savage abandon. His axe sang, cleaving through snarling jaws and slashing limbs from bodies. He hacked a beast in two from crown to crotch, the creature spilling steaming viscera that writhed like living worms. Another lunged at him, fanged maw wide, and Vargosh caught it by the throat with one ironclad hand, squeezing until the bones snapped like twigs, before slamming it into the ground hard enough to leave a crater. The blooded path demanded slaughter, and Vargosh answered with a fury that shook the stones. Yet, even as the beasts died screaming, the toll was terrible. One of his champions, a savage brute named Carnul, who had split a dozen demons in his time, was dragged down by 3 of the monsters, torn limb from limb while roaring defiance to his last breath. Others fell, mangled and half-devoured, their corpses feeding the canyon's endless hunger. By the time they stumbled free from the worst of it, barely half of the broken fang remained. The survivors looked less like men and more like revenants, their armor dented and torn, their weapons black with gore, their bodies crisscrossed with wounds that festered and smoked. But their eyes burned brighter than ever. Rage and pain had forged them into something terrible, something that could not die easily. Vargosh led them on, his own body a map of agony, deep gashes across his arms and legs, a broken rib grinding with every breath, and blood dripping from a dozen lesser wounds. Yet he did not slow, he could not. The mark of wrath seared his flesh like a brand, its heat spreading through his veins, its whispers filling his ears. Kill, maim, burn, endure, conquer. At a narrow gorge choked with the remains of ancient battles, rusted swords, broken banners, cracked skulls stacked in mournful cairns, Vargosh paused. He raised his axe high, and the survivors gathered around him, their faces painted with blood and ashes. "This is the blooded path," Vargosh roared, his voice carrying through the canyon like a thunderclap. "It seeks to break us, to strip our flesh and grind our bones, but we are Khorne's chosen. We are the storm that drowns the weak. We are the wrath that scours the earth." The broken fang answered with a howl of pure, murderous exultation. Beyond the gorge, the land rose sharply, the terrain shifting from ash-choked ravines to fields of broken glass, and rivers of molten iron, and on the horizon, framed against the roiling sky, rose Mount Kazaroth, a black monolith crowned with endless fire, its peak lost within the storm. The Firebird waited. Vargosh could feel it now, pulsing in the distance, a heartbeat that answered the rage in his own. With every death, every trial, every step soaked in blood, he drew closer. The blooded path had demanded its price, and Vargosh had paid in full. Now he would claim what was his, or die in a fury that would scar the heavens themselves. Chapter 13. Flames of Madness. Mount Kazaroth tore at the sky like a black dagger, its upper slopes wreathed in endless fire and smoke. Rivers of molten rock oozed down its flanks like infected wounds, searing deep channels into the broken earth below. Every tremor, every belch of smoke from the crater, sounded like the bellow of some titanic beast slumbering in fury. Vargosh stood at the base of the volcano, gazing upward through the shimmering heat. The mark of wrath seared his chest, burning hotter with every heartbeat, as if the mountain itself called to him or warned him. Around him, the remains of the broken fang gathered. They were a shadow of the force that had once marched south, half dead, blood-caked, their armor cracked and their weapons nicked and blackened. But their eyes burned with a feverish light, a raw animal hunger that mirrored Vargosh's own. They had come too far. They would not turn back. The climb began. Each step was agony. The rocks underfoot were red-hot, searing through boots and flesh alike. The smoke choked their lungs. The heat scoured their skin raw. It was as if the mountain itself sought to strip them of everything, flesh, sanity, even soul, before they could reach its summit. And then came the sorcerers. Halfway up the blackened slopes, where rivers of lava met fields of jagged obsidian, they emerged, creatures once human, now mutated beyond recognition by the touch of the warp. Their flesh was a tapestry of corruption, extra arms ending in talons, mouths where no mouths should be, skin blistered and slick with unnatural slime. They wore tattered robes scorched by fire and daubed with symbols of forbidden power, and they moved with a jerky, insectal grace. In their hands they bore staffs crowned with burning skulls, and with each chant the very air shimmered and buckled. They had come not to worship the Firebird, but to enslave it, to bind it in chains of flesh and soul, to wield its endless rage for their own blasphemous ends. Vargosh's lip curled in a snarl of pure hatred. There could be no mercy. With a howl that tore from the deepest pit of his soul, he charged. The broken fang followed, bellowing war cries, weapons raised high. The first sorcerer raised his staff, and the ground beneath Vargosh exploded in a geyser of molten rock. One of Vargosh's warriors vanished instantly, swallowed whole by the fire. Another stumbled, screaming as his legs melted beneath him. Vargosh ignored the carnage, hurtling through the inferno, axe swinging. The sorcerer tried to conjure a barrier of crimson flame, but Vargosh's axe smashed through it, the blade biting into the mutant's chest with a wet snapping sound. The sorcerer shrieked, ichor spraying from his ruined body, and crumpled into the ash. All around him, battle raged. The sorcerers fought not with steel, but with the raw chaos of the mountain. Bolts of searing, liquefied hate lashed from their staffs, peeling flesh from bone. Mutant familiars, twisted things that once may have been men or beasts, threw themselves at the broken fang with slavering maws and dagger claws. Vargosh waded into them with the brutal efficiency of a butcher. He split a familiar in two with a single blow, entrails hissing as they hit the volcanic rock. A second leapt for his throat, but he caught it mid-air, drove his thumbs into its bulging, misaligned eyes, and crushed its skull between his hands with a sound like ripe fruit bursting. The sorcerers chanted louder, their voices a discordant choir that made the stones tremble. Above them, in the fire-wreathed sky, a shape stirred, vast, winged, and incandescent. The Firebird. Its screech split the heavens, a sound of such pure, agonized fury that men dropped their weapons and clawed at their ears, blood pouring from their ruptured drown. The sorcerers redoubled their efforts, weaving a lattice of dark energy across the sky, attempting to ensnare the beast. Vargosh saw it all in an instant, saw the chains forming, saw the web tightening. And he knew, if they succeeded, all would be lost. Bellowing with a rage that tore his throat raw, Vargosh hurled himself at the heart of the ritual. He smashed through a line of chanting sorcerers, sending bodies flying like broken dolls. He hacked a mutant high priest in half at the waist, viscera and half-formed demonic appendages spilling onto the stone. Another sorcerer tried to conjure a barrier of ice, but Vargosh shattered it with a blow that also crushed the wretch's skull into a red mist. The broken fang fought at his heels, dying by the dozen, but giving no quarter. Vargosh reached the central altar, a jagged spire of black stone crowned with the smoking remains of previous sacrifices, and found the High Magister. The creature that had once been a man was now a towering monstrosity, his body writhing with parasitic tendrils, his mouth an endless maw of teeth and muttered blasphemies. In his clawed hands he held a staff, formed from the spine of a god-beast, its tip blazing with chains of molten magic. The Magister hissed and struck, a tendril lashing out with the force of a battering ram. Vargosh took the hit full in the chest, lifted off his feet, and slammed into the stone with bone-cracking force. Blood flooded his mouth, but he rose, coughing and grinning, the mark of wrath burning hotter than ever before. The Magister unleashed a storm of fire and hate. Vargosh roared and charged through it, armor melting from his shoulders, flesh blistering and blackening. Pain was nothing. Pain was an old friend. He slammed into the Magister with the force of an avalanche, driving his axe deep into the sorcerer's bloated abdomen. The beast shrieked, claws raking furrows down Vargosh's back, but the Bloodseeker only drove deeper, hacking and tearing, ripping the creature apart with a berserker's glee. With a final, earth-shaking bellow, Vargosh tore the Magister's heart from his chest and hurled it into the molten river. The lattice of chains shattered. Above, the Firebird screamed again, but this time in triumph, not despair. The volcano shuddered, great gouts of flame and ash belching skyward. The remaining sorcerers fled, abandoning their twisted altar, but Vargosh gave them no thought. He stood atop the shattered altar, blood pouring from his many wounds, armor cracked and fused to his body by the fire, and stared up at the approaching inferno that was the Firebird. It had seen him. It knew him. The final trial awaited. Vargosh bared his teeth in a rictus grin, lifted his axe in salute to the burning heavens, and roared his challenge. Come, beast of flame. Come, destiny. Chapter 14. The Guardian of Ash. The world narrowed into fire and ruin. Mount Kazaroth groaned beneath Vargosh's feet as he ascended the final stretch toward the summit. Rivers of molten stone bled from the mountain's flanks, casting wild, flickering shadows across the jagged path. The very air blistered flesh and boiled the blood, a searing gale filled with the distant, rumbling heartbeat of something vast and furious. The Firebird loomed above, a storm of living flame circling the peak, its scream a chorus of 1,000 murdered worlds. But another presence blocked Vargosh's path. The Guardian of Ash awaited him. Brakther, the Ashen Maw. It emerged from the choking smoke like a nightmare dragged from the bowels of Khorne's own throne. Towering thrice the height of a man, its form was wrought from charred iron and blackened muscle, Plates of cracked, blood-stained armor hung from its hulking frame, fused with smoldering flesh that oozed molten ichor from every wound. Its head was a wolfish skull wreathed in eternal fire, hollow eye sockets burning with baleful, unholy light. In its clawed hands it bore a great cleaver, a slab of blood steel etched with countless names, each letter a soul it had devoured in battle. When it spoke, its voice was the grinding of mountains, the howling of the void. "You who seek the flame!" The words shook the mountain, loosed avalanches down its sides. "You who bleached wrath into the earth, you must bleed again, until only ash remains." Vargosh stepped forward, every muscle screaming in protest, his armor half melted and fused to his flesh. He raised his battered axe, its blade still slick with the blood of the fallen. "I do not fear the fire," he snarled, voice ragged but defiant. "I am the fire." Bratha's maw split into something resembling a grin, a hideous, rictus leer, and then it charged, the earth shaking with each colossal step. Vargosh braced and met the demon head-on. The first clash was a thunderous collision that sent shockwaves radiating down the mountain. Bradthor's cleaver slammed down like the hammer of a god, and Vargosh barely twisted aside, the blade shearing a chunk of molten rock from the slope where he had stood. Vargosh retaliated with a brutal, overhead strike. His axe bit into Brathia's shoulder, sending a fountain of molten ichor spraying into the air, each drop burning holes through the stone. The demon howled in fury and backhanded Vargosh with a force that cracked bones and hurled him a dozen yards back. Vargosh crashed into a jut of black glass, the impact driving the breath from his lungs. He staggered upright, blood dripping from his mouth, ribs grinding, but his eyes burned brighter than ever. Brathor advanced, cleaver dragging deep scars on the rock, its every breath a torrent of ash and cinders. Vargosh hurled himself back into the fray. They clashed again and again, a savage dance of steel and fire. Vargosh's axe struck deep, carving into diamond flesh. But every blow cost him. Brathor's cleaver slashed open his thigh, nearly severing the muscle. A glancing blow crushed Vargosh's pauldron, splintering the bone beneath. Still, Vargosh fought on, driven by something deeper than pain, deeper than mortal will, the endless seething need to conquer, to kill, to win. Breton roared and unleashed a blast of molten breath, a torrent of living fire that incinerated everything in its path. Vargosh dove through it, rolling beneath the worst of the blast, his skin blistering and blackening, and came up swinging. His axe bit deep into Brathor's gut, ripping upward in a gory spray of molten blood and scorched viscera. The demon staggered. Vargosh seized the moment. With a bestial roar he leapt, swinging his axe in a two-handed arc that cleaved into Brathor's throat, the impact sending a shockwave of force that cracked the ground beneath their feet. The ashen maw grasped at its neck, molten blood pouring from the wound in rivers, sizzling against the volcanic stone. Vargosh wrenched the axe free, reversed his grip, and drove the blade into the daemon's chest with every ounce of fury and hate he could muster. Altor bellowed, a sound of such raw fury that the heavens above trembled. The demon staggered back, flames spilling from its ruptured body, and with a final shuddering roar it collapsed onto its back, shaking the mountain with its death throes. Its body began to disintegrate immediately, crumbling into ash and cinder, leaving behind only the seared imprint of its passing and a scorched trail leading upward. Vargosh stood over the smoking ruin, his body a broken, bloodied ruin, his armor fused to burnt flesh, but his eyes still blazed with unstoppable, endless wrath. He had slain the Guardian. He had conquered the Ashen Maw. The path to the Firebird was clear now. Above him, the creature of flame and fury shrieked its defiance, its wings spreading wide enough to blot out the heavens, a living conflagration waiting for its final challenger. Vargosh staggered forward, dragging his axe behind him, leaving a trail of smoldering footprints in his wake. There was no more warband, no more past, no more gods, only fire, blood, and the final reckoning. Chapter 15. Wings of Fury. The summit of Mount Khasurath was a hell beyond mortal reckoning. The ground itself bled fire, great rivers of molten stone weaving intricate, cursed sigils into the volcanic rock. Columns of flame erupted skyward in violent bursts, vomiting ash and burning glass into the churning, blood-colored sky. The very air was alive, crackling with a rage so potent it stung the eyes and scorched the lungs. Every heartbeat felt like a hammer blow against Vargosh's ruined chest. And there, amidst the howling inferno, it came. The Firebird. It descended from the tempest above, a titan of burning wings and molten flesh, a creature forged from the very hatred of the world. Its wings stretched across the sky, each beat sending shock waves of searing wind across the summit, flaying the loose stone into dust. Its body was a roiling mass of molten gold and crimson, constantly shifting between form and formlessness, a storm trapped within the shape of a bird. Its head was crowned in flame, a beak of blackened iron snapping and shrieking, eyes twin furnaces burning with eternal rage. Every movement, every scream birthed wildfires in its wake. The heat pouring from it was so intense that the rock around Vargosh bubbled and ran like wax. It screamed. The sound split the heavens, a shriek of such raw, furious agony that it felt like a blade raking down the spine of existence itself. The volcano beneath them shook violently, belching more fire and toxic gas into the burning sky. Vargosh stood alone before it, a battered, broken thing of flesh and iron. But he did not kneel. He raised his axe high, its edge chipped and blackened, and roared his defiance into the face of the storm. The Firebird shrieked again, the sound an assault on every sense, and dove. It came at him in a comet of fury, a blinding meteor of fire and death. Vargosh moved, barely avoiding the first strike. The Firebird's talons, each the size of a warhorse, gouged a trench in the stone where he had stood, the ground igniting in its wake. He hurled himself aside, rolling across the blistering rock, the molten ground searing through his armor and into his flesh. The beast wheeled in the air, wings creating cyclones of blistering heat, and dove again. This time, Vargosh met it head-on. He leapt, axe raised, muscles screaming in protest, and struck as the Firebird swooped. His blade bit into its wing, tearing a gash through molten flesh and spraying rivers of liquid fire. The heat should have killed him. It should have boiled the blood in his veins. But the mark of wrath burned hotter still, shielding him with Khorne's own fury. The Firebird screeched in pain, banking sharply, trailing fire and molten blood. Vargosh landed hard, his legs nearly buckling beneath him, but he rose immediately, snarling through gritted teeth. Again and again the Firebird struck, and each time Vargosh answered with steel and hate. He hacked at the beating wings, at the snapping beak, at the slashing talons. Each blow cost him dearly. Skin blackened and peeled from his body, his left arm hung uselessly from a torn socket, and one of his eyes wept blood, but he gave as good as he took. The Firebird refused to fall. It rose into the sky once more, the flames around it intensifying, until it seemed less a creature and more a sun about to consume the world. It opened its beak and unleashed a torrent of pure, liquid flame. Vargosh roared and charged into it. The fire engulfed him instantly, eating away what little remained of his armor, flaying flesh from bone. But he pushed forward, step after agonized step, driven not by survival, but by pure, unrelenting rage. Through the wall of fire, he saw the Firebird hovering, its chest exposed, its heart a molten core of pure hatred, beating in rhythm with the mountain. With the last of his strength, Vargosh hurled his axe. The weapon spun end over end through the maelstrom, trailing smoke and blood, and struck the Firebird's heart, dead center. The explosion was titanic. The summit shattered, sending rivers of magma cascading down the mountainside. The Firebird shrieked, its form spasming, flames recoiling violently into itself. The sky itself seemed to tear, revealing the black void beyond. Vargosh was thrown back, smashed into a jagged spire of black glass, every bone in his body screaming in protest. He slid to the ground, gasping, bleeding, burning, but alive. The Firebird staggered in the air, its form flickering, wavering between collapse and rebirth. It turned its gaze upon him. For a moment, warrior and god-beast locked eyes, and Vargosh saw not hatred, not malice, but recognition. The Firebird screamed one last time, a sound of acceptance, of fury given form, and then it hurtled toward him, a falling star of molten vengeance. Vargosh did not flinch. He opened his arms wide. The Firebird struck him like a hammer of flame, and the world vanished in a blinding conflagration of blood, fire, and scream. And somewhere, deep in the molten heart of the mountain, something ancient and terrible was reborn. Chapter 16. The Binding Attempt. The summit was a blasted wasteland of molten scars and shattered stone. Ash fell in heavy sheets from the sky, blanketing the world in a gray, suffocating pall. Rivers of lava snaked through the ruins like serpents, hissing and gurgling with every convulsion of the wounded mountain. The roar of distant avalanches rumbled in the depths below, the earth bleeding fire and hate into the open air. Vargosh knelt at the center of the scorched plain, a broken silhouette against the writhing inferno. His body was a ruin, skin blackened and flaking, muscle torn and raw, bones grinding with every shuddering breath. Only the mark of wrath pulsed with undiminished strength on his chest, burning so fiercely it shone through the ash like a beacon. Before him, the Firebird circled. Its form was unstable now, spasming between shapes, a monstrous bird of flame one moment, a writhing storm of molten wings the next. Rivers of burning ichor streamed from wounds left by Vargosh's assault, and yet it remained. A being of pure, incandescent fury. The beast's cry ripped through the ash, a noise so colossal that it seemed to split the world apart. Vargosh bared his bloodied teeth and planted the haft of his axe into the molten rock beside him. His left hand, the flesh half melted down to sinew and bone, clenched around a jagged dagger carved from obsidian and soaked in the blood of his fallen warriors. The blood-binding ritual. The rite was an ancient atrocity, whispered of only in the blood-choked temples of the northern wastes, a pact of violence, suffering, and dominion. Through blood offered freely, through will made iron, one could enslave even the fiercest of beasts, or be destroyed trying. Vargosh rose to his feet, the movement slow, agonizing, every nerve aflame. He dragged the dagger across his chest in a savage arc, reopening old wounds, cutting deep into muscle and scarring. Blood sprayed forth, sizzling as it hit the burning ground. With his ruined voice, Vargosh began the chant. It was not words, not truly, more a guttural, snarling series of sounds that carried the weight of ancient, violent promises. Each syllable twisted the air, made the ground quake. Each breath drawn ripped at his lungs like barbed wire, but he pressed on, his will unbending. The Firebird screamed in response, flaring to titanic proportions, wings blotting out the fractured sky. It dove. Vargosh thrust both hands into the air, blood streaming from his chest and palms, forming sigils in the ash-choked winds. The red mist spiraled upward, wrapping around the descending creature like chains. The Firebird shrieked in defiance, struggling against the invisible bonds. Its wings battered the air, sending walls of flame rushing outward. The very stones cracked and wept lava beneath it. Vargosh gritted his teeth and bellowed the final, shuddering words of the ritual. The blood chains solidified. The Firebird bucked and writhed, its body twisting violently, burning brighter with every moment. It was agony given form, rage unbounded, a primal scream in the shape of a god. And it would not submit. The first rupture came from within the Firebird's core, a pulse of searing white light that obliterated everything it touched. Vargosh was hurled backward, his body striking a jagged spire of obsidian hard enough to shatter stone. Blood burst from his mouth, and he fell to his knees, blinded, deafened, but still breathing. He staggered to his feet, leaning heavily on his axe. The Firebird hovered above him, the blood chains snapping one by one, its molten form shifting and roiling in its fury, its eyes twin stars of pure, undiluted hate, locked onto him. Vargosh spat a gob of blood into the ash and grinned. "Come, then," he rasped. "Show me your fury." The Firebird unleashed its full might. A cataclysmic inferno erupted from its body, a sphere of flame and force that expanded outward with the speed of a hurricane. The ground disintegrated. The sky tore itself apart. Reality buckled under the sheer, impossible force of the creature's rage, while he kept the bull in the make. Vargosh braced as the firestorm engulfed him. He screamed, but it was a scream of defiance, of savage, unyielding fury. Flesh melted from his bones, his armor evaporated into vapor, his blood boiled into mist. But still he stood, axe raised high, a blackened titan at the heart of the apocalypse. The fire raged, and the mountain wept rivers of flame, and the world howled its death cry. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the inferno receded. The summit was gone, a scorched, molten plateau that stretched into an endless void of ash and smoke. At the center of it, Vargosh knelt, barely more than a charred husk, the mark of wrath still burning bright on his ruined chest. Above him, the Firebird circled once more, wounded, furious, but free. The binding had failed, but Vargosh was not broken. Slowly, painfully, he rose, glaring at the beast with his one remaining eye. He would not tame it. He would conquer it through sheer will, through the raw, merciless strength that had brought him here. This was not the end. This was only the beginning. The Firebird shrieked once more, and Vargosh answered with a roar of his own, a sound that shook the very bones of the earth, a challenge hurled into the teeth of destiny. Chapter 17. Betrayal Among Bloodbound. The aftermath of the binding attempt left the summit of Mount Kazaroth a wasteland of molten scars and drifting ash. The air shimmered with residual heat, and the very stones pulsed as if alive, veins of molten blood writhing just beneath the broken surface. Vargosh stood at the lip of a shattered ridge, his burnt flesh cracking with every ragged breath. The Firebird still circled high above, a wounded godling, its molten blood raining down in great hissing gouts. Though the blood binding had failed, its power still saturated the mountaintop, raw, violent, untamed, a lure too great for any mortal soul to ignore. Behind Vargosh, the remains of the broken fang gathered. They had survived horrors that would have broken even the most hardened warbands, the shattered realms, the siege, the volcanic madness of Kazaroth itself. But survival had changed them. Starved of purpose, battered by the path of blood, their minds had cracked, their loyalty twisted into something sharper, something desperate. Among them were his lieutenants, warriors Vargosh had trusted with blood and battle. Krazak Skull-Taker, Hulmar the Bladed, Seraka Bloodborne. They watched Vargosh with narrowed eyes, weapons loose in their hands, shoulders tense, the language of betrayal thick in the air. Vargosh could taste it. The betrayal reeked more pungently than the burning flesh or the sulphurous winds. It curdled the blood, stoked the fires of wrath. Krazak stepped forward, axe slung lazily over one scarred shoulder, a cruel smirk twisting his ruined face. "You are broken, Vargosh," he said, voice a low growl. "You failed. The Firebird still flies free. Khorne demands strength, not stubborn fools who cannot seize what is theirs." Murmurs of agreement rumbled through the gathered warriors. Vargosh did not move. His gaze locked on Krazak, and for a moment the world narrowed to a single point of burning clarity. "You dare speak of strength?" Vargosh rasped, voice like grinding stone. "You, who hid behind my axe while others bled?" Hulmar spat into the ash. "Your failure is our doom, Bloodseeker. We will claim the Firebird ourselves, and your skull will be the first offering to our new reign." The tension snapped like a drawn bowstring. Krazak hurled his axe in a savage arc, the weapon spinning end over end toward Vargosh's head. But Vargosh was already moving, his own axe sweeping up in a brutal parry. The two weapons clashed with a deafening clang, sparks spraying into the choking air. The summit erupted into chaos. Hulmar and Seraka charged with blood-maddened howls, their weapons flashing. Vargosh met them with a roar of pure, undiluted hate, the mark of wrath searing with new fury. Krazak was the first to die. Vargosh twisted aside from a wild overhead swing, driving the spiked butt of his axe into Krazak's knee with a sickening crunch. As the traitor stumbled, Vargosh seized him by the throat, lifted him high and slammed him down onto a jagged shard of obsidian. Krazak shrieked once before the stone burst through his chest, his life draining away in steaming gouts. Hulmar was on him next, twin swords carving twin arcs of silver death. Vargosh caught one blade on the haft of his axe, but the second slashed a deep gash across his ribs, blood hissing as it hit the superheated ground. Pain fueled his rage. Vargosh roared and slammed his forehead into Hulmar's nose, shattering it in a spray of blood and cartilage. Staggering, Hulmar barely had time to raise a blade before Vargosh's axe sheared through his shoulder, cleaving deep into his torso. Hulmar dropped to his knees, gurgling, before Vargosh ripped the axe free in a great wet explosion of flesh. Seraka screamed and leapt, her glaive spinning, a whirlwind of deadly steel. She was fast, faster than the others, and her blade bit deep into Vargosh's thigh, nearly severing the muscle. The Bloodseeker grunted, falling back a step, but his rage was bottomless now, a bottomless sea that could not be drained. He batted the glaive aside with a savage swipe, closing the distance in a heartbeat. His free hand seized Seraka's throat mid-swing, squeezing with the strength of a dying god. Bones cracked beneath his grip. Her glaive clattered to the stones. "You were my blood," Vargosh snarled, voice thick with fury and betrayal. Seraka clawed at his arm, her nails ripping furrows into his scorched skin. With a snarl of finality, Vargosh lifted her into the air and slammed her down onto a jagged outcrop, impaling her through the back. Her body convulsed, her blood hissing as it spilled over the molten rock. Then went still. The world fell silent. The traitors lay dead, their bodies broken and bleeding at Vargosh's feet. The surviving warriors of the Broken Fang, those who had not joined the betrayal, knelt in silence, their faces masks of terror and awe. None dared meet Vargosh's burning gaze. Vargosh planted his axe in the earth and leaned on it heavily, blood streaming from a dozen wounds. His body screamed for rest, but the fire within him roared louder, drowning out weakness with the savage hymn of hate. And above, The Firebird screamed again, its wings casting the broken summit in shifting, hellish light. It had witnessed the betrayal. He had witnessed his triumph. There would be no more doubt, no more question of worth. Only one path remained: fire, blood, and the forging of destiny in the heart of a dying world. Vargosh tore his axe from the earth, cast one final glance at the corpses of his once brothers, and began the final ascent. The Firebird awaited, and he would claim it, or he would burn the world trying. Chapter 18. Ascendance Through Slaughter. The summit of Mount Kazaroth burned in the color of the end of worlds. Ash fell like black snow across a battlefield steeped in death. Lava spilled from the ruptured slopes, bathing the mountain's flanks in rivers of molten fury. The Firebird circled high above, its wounded form trailing fire and molten blood, its screams shaking the very bones of the earth. Vargosh stood alone amidst the carnage, the corpses of the traitorous Broken Fang strewn in heaps at his feet. The mark of wrath on his chest flared, molten lines searing into his flesh, fed by the slaughter he had wrought. Each heartbeat echoed like a war drum inside his skull, growing louder, faster, heavier, until he was little more than a vessel for rage made flesh. But even now, more came. The remnants of the rebels, those too cowardly to join the first assault, had found their courage in desperation. They surged toward him in a screaming mass, blades flashing, shields splintered, their bodies battered but driven by the blind madness of fear and greed. They wanted the Firebird. They would have to tear it from his dead hands. Vargosh grinned, blood leaking from split lips, and raised his axe high, its edge blazing crimson in the volcanic light. "Come then," he roared, the sound tearing from his ravaged throat like the howl of a dying god. "Come and die." The first warrior, a blood-soaked giant wielding a spiked maul, charged with a guttural scream. Vargosh sidestepped at the last moment, the maul crashing into the molten ground where he had stood, sending shards of glowing rock into the air. In a single fluid motion, Vargosh drove his axe up under the giant's jaw, splitting skull and brain in a wet eruption of gore. The body toppled sideways, dragging a cloud of steam and blood with it. Another came, and another. They fell like wheat before the scythe. Vargosh was a whirlwind of butchery, his axe carving bloody arcs through the ash-choked air. He hacked through necks and bellies, hewed arms from shoulders, split torsos down to the spine. Blood fountained from the fallen, soaking the cracked stones, feeding the mountain's endless hunger. For every enemy that struck at him, he answered with brutality beyond reason. A blade grazed his ribs. He ripped the offender's arm from its socket and beat him to death with it. A spear pierced his thigh. He yanked it free and drove it through the wielder's open mouth, pinning him to the ground like a grotesque standard. The air became thick with screams and the choking stench of burnt meat. Still they came, and still he killed. Each death fed the mark. Each soul torn from its flesh tightened the bond with the Firebird circling above. Vargosh could feel it, a tether of pure, incandescent rage linking him to the beast, growing stronger with every sacrifice. His vision narrowed into a crimson haze. He barely felt the wounds anymore, the shattered ribs grinding together, the deep gash across his back pouring blood down his legs. Pain was irrelevant. Thought was irrelevant. There was only slaughter. The earth trembled with the violence. The sky split with the force of the Firebird's cries, its wings fanning the volcano's fires into towering pillars of flame. Rivers of blood and magma mingled, the ground itself seeming to wail beneath the carnage. Vargosh waded through it all, tireless, pitiless, unstoppable. A warband's banner-bearer, a warrior named Thorgal, once a brother to Vargosh in the early days of the Broken Fang, threw himself forward, warhammer raised high, screaming curses and promises of vengeance. Vargosh caught the hammer blow on the haft of his axe, turned, and with a snarl of sheer hatred drove his own weapon through Thorgel's chest, splintering ribcage and heart alike. He pulled the axe free with a wet, sucking sound, letting the body crumple like a puppet with cut strings. Vargosh stood amid the dying gasps of the last few survivors, blood dripping from every edge and seam of his body, every breath a ragged furnace blast. None remained standing. The traitors had been annihilated, their blood offerings consumed by the mountain, their souls fed to the Firebird. Above, the creature dipped lower, its vast wings casting burning shadows across the battlefield. It screamed again, but this time the sound was different. It was not fury. It was not pain. It was recognition. The Firebird had seen the truth. It had seen Vargosh triumph, his supremacy forged through the only currency Khorne respected, blood and death. The bond between them solidified, thick and strong, like chains forged from the molten heart of the mountain itself. Vargosh staggered forward, each step sending splatters of blood and ash into the air. His axe, slick with gore, dragged behind him, carving a jagged trail through the burnt stone. He raised his ruined, blood-blackened arms toward the Firebird. The creature hovered above him, wings beating slow and ponderous, its furnace eyes fixed solely upon him. There was no resistance now, no defiance, only rage, mirrored and amplified, endless and pure. Vargosh bellowed into the storm, a raw sound of conquest and ascension, his voice swallowed by the screaming winds. At that moment, he was no longer merely a man. He was wrath-given flesh, harbinger of fire and slaughter. The world itself trembled before the bond that had been forged, a pact written in the blood of the traitors, sealed by violence, anointed by the Firebird's fury. Mount Kazaroth wept fire into the sky, and Vargosh, Bloodseeker and Lord of the Ashen Flame, prepared to seize a destiny written not in fate, but in endless, beautiful slaughter. Chapter 19. The Firebird's Choice. The world had become a crucible of fire and blood. Vargosh stumbled across the shattered summit of Mount Kazaroth, a man more dead than alive. His body was an abattoir of injuries, skin burned raw, muscles torn and charred, bones cracked and splintered beneath the weight of endless battle. Blood poured from him in sluggish rivers, steaming as it hit the molten ground. Each breath was a battle, each heartbeat a scream inside his ruined chest. The Firebird circled low above him, a colossus of molten fury and shrieking vengeance. Its wings beat slow, thunderous, each movement scattering embers across the sky like falling stars. Its eyes, twin furnaces of endless rage, bored into Vargosh's soul. There was no pity there, no mercy, only the question that had echoed since the beginning. Are you worthy? Vargosh fell to one knee, axe slipping from his scorched fingers, the weapon clattering against the blood-slick rock. His vision swam, darkness gnawed at the edges of his mind. His body cried out for surrender, for the peace of death. But deep within the furnace of his soul, a single blinding spark flared. Rage, the same rage that had driven him from the broken plains of the wastes, the same rage that had carried him through betrayal, through the hollow ghosts of the past, through endless seas of blood and ash, rage that refused to die. Vargosh threw back his head and howled, a sound that tore his throat raw, a sound that split the ash-choked heavens, a sound of pure, undiluted wrath. The Firebird screamed in answer, a deafening, all-consuming bellow that shook the bones of the mountain, that boiled the blood of the dead and the living alike. It descended, a living comet of fire and hate, its talons outstretched, its body a sun unto itself. Vargosh did not flinch. He opened his arms wide, offering himself, offering everything. His broken body, his soul steeped in slaughter, his unbreakable, insatiable rage. The Firebird struck. The impact was a cataclysm. Fire engulfed Vargosh, roaring through his flesh, his bones, his very essence. His skin blackened and peeled away, his blood evaporated into steam. His muscles tore apart under the tidal wave of burning force. But he did not fall. He screamed his fury into the heart of the inferno, meeting the Firebird's wrath with his own, their hatred intertwined, two storms colliding, two titans of violence wrestling for supremacy. The Firebird's claws raked into his soul, tearing apart weakness, burning away doubt. His mind fractured under the onslaught, but in the cracks, something greater was forged. Pain beyond comprehension became fuel. Agony became power. Vargosh reached into the flames, seized the heart of the Firebird with both burning hands, and dragged it into himself with a roar that split the heavens. There was no boundary anymore. No map. No peace. Only fury. Only fire. Only wrath. The Firebird's molten form poured into him, flowing through his veins, saturating every cell, every broken shard of bone, every screaming nerve with living flame. His flesh burned away, replaced by something harder, something born of ash and hate. The mark of wrath on his chest exploded in light, the symbol of Khorne, burning so brightly that the skies themselves wept fire. When the blaze finally receded, when the smoke and ash peeled away in shuddering, gasping waves, Vargosh stood alone at the summit. No longer mortal, no longer broken. His form was a seething titan of flesh and flame, blood and steel. His veins glowed like molten rivers beneath blackened skin. His eyes blazed with the eternal, shrieking rage of the Firebird itself. The wings of flame unfurled behind him, massive, burning, majestic, the gift and curse of the creature he had conquered, not through dominance, but through total mutual annihilation and rebirth. Vargosh was reborn, the Bloodseeker no more. He was now the Ashen Phoenix, a vessel of Khorne's purest wrath, a creature of endless battle, destined to drown the world in fire, in blood, in screams. The volcano erupted behind him, a final roar of approval from the earth itself, vomiting rivers of molten death into the storm-racked sky. And Vargosh spread his burning wings and descended from the summit of Kazaroth, a living cataclysm. His war cry, a herald of endless slaughter. Where he went, only ashes would remain. Where he fought, only blood would quench the fires he carried. And he was fire. He was death. He was eternal wrath. Chapter 20. Lord of Cinder and Blood. A new sun rose over the mortal realms, not of light, not of life, but of fire and ruin. It screamed as it rose, a flaming omen in the shape of a warrior god, wreathed in molten wings and dripping with the blood of forsaken gods and broken champions. Vargosh, no longer the man who had crawled from the corpse piles of the chaos wastes, no longer the butchered wretch who had failed to bind the Firebird. He was now something else, something born from wrath, birthed in flame, sealed in blood. The Ashen Phoenix. Where he walked, mountains cracked and bled magma, forests ignited from his shadow alone. Cities saw his coming and crumbled beneath their own weight in fear, their people howling in terror before his blade ever touched them. His army, the Ashian host, marched behind him, a legion of fire-touched, rage-driven monsters. Their eyes glowed like embers in a skull pit. Their skin bore scars of branding and devotion, warped by the Firebird's lingering essence. They sang no war chants. They needed none. The screaming of the sky and the weeping of the ground beneath their feet were him enough. Vargosh led them from the smoldering remnants of Mount Kazaroth into the borderlands of the mortal empires, lands once vibrant with life and color. They became fields of ash. The first to fall was Avarak's Hold, a great walled city nestled within mountain ridges and protected by geomantic wards of ancient origin. They held for a day, perhaps two. The defenders fought valiantly, knights of jade, mages cloaked in golden light, priests shouting prayers into the inferno. It did not matter. Vargosh came like the end of days. He flew over their walls on wings of fire, molten blood raining from his form, melting stone and steel. His axe, now more a flaming extension of his will than a weapon, tore through wards and flesh alike. The gates exploded into slag. The paladins of the light-bound order met him in the central square, chanting their mantras, blades gleaming with righteous sorcery. Vargosh incinerated them in a single sweep. He left only scorched armor and piles of bubbling meat in his wake. The survivors fled, screaming, burning, broken. From Avarak's Hold, the ashen host surged outward, through the plains of Morning Bone, through the obsidian marches, through the twin kingdoms of Verad and Nisau. They left behind not conquered lands, but desolate pyres. Towers melted like wax. Rivers turned to blood. The skies darkened under clouds of soot and carrion smoke. The gods watched. Torn rumbled on his throne of brass, the pile of skulls beneath him twitching as his gaze narrowed. His chosen had transcended mere servitude. He had become something even the god of war had not anticipated, a weapon of fire too wild to leash, too terrible to deny. And the other gods? They began to whisper in fear. For in Vargosh's scream they heard no prayer, no plea. In me were only death. It was Varghes, the city of masks, that dared to stand last. High upon obsidian cliffs, defended by sorcerers and artifacts older than empires, they summoned the sky to break him. Great constructs of bronze and stone, powered by daemon hearts, rose like titans. Vargosh was not a man. He was not flesh. He was the wrath of the mountain made manifest. He was vengeance for every flame ever snuffed out by cowardice. He tore through their engines of war like a beast unbound. He melted their towers and drank the screams of their high magi. He carved the name of Corne into the earth with rivers of blood. And at the city's heart, as the flames rose high, he carved his own name next. Vargosh. He stood atop their smoldering citadel, wings blazing, the ash of the slain swirling in an eternal storm around him. His warriors knelt, heads bowed in silence. The mortal realms had no more armies left. No more gods answered their cries. A final cry went out across the winds, heard in dreams, in madness, in dying breaths. The world had a new master. He did not demand worship. He did not offer mercy. He brought only cinders. And in those blackened lands, children would one day be born with eyes like burning coals. Entire bloodlines would carry the echo of his wrath. Shrines of bone would be raised in his image, where acolytes would set themselves ablaze in blind ecstasy, calling down the fire of their god-king. For Vargosh had become more than legend. He was the eternal scream at the end of time, the burning silence after every war, the lord of cinder and blood. And his crusade had only just begun. Epilogue. Whispers of fire and blood. The chaos wastes, ever writhing, ever bleeding, were alive with whispers. They rode the shrieking winds that stripped flesh from bone. They slithered between the shattered mountains and blackened rivers. They seeped from the lips of mad seers, and gibbering cultists, echoing in war-torn camps where firelight danced on broken weapons and raw wounds. New power had risen. From the smoldering corpse of Mount Gazeroth came a legend, a name spoken in awe and terror. Vargosh, Lord of Cinder and Blood, the Ashen Phoenix. Some said he was no longer mortal, that the fire of the Firebird burned in his veins, that his flesh was fused with molten iron and demonic flame. Others whispered that he had conquered death itself, his soul a living sigil of corn's rage, too monstrous even for the gods to chain. Where once tribes fought for scraps among the ruins of forgotten empires, now they marched as one under the banner of the burning skull. Armies of bloodreavers, skull-grinders, and fell champions rallied to his call, their eyes hollowed by devotion, their bodies offered willingly to the flame. They called themselves the Ashen Host, and they bled the land dry. Entire fortresses fell to them, drowned in crimson tides. Cities, great walled bastions of mortal defiance, were reduced to smoldering craters, nothing left but fields of charred skulls and rivers of steaming blood. Kingdoms collapsed under the storm of their advance, their kings crucified on trees of blackened bone, their monuments toppled and used to build altars to endless war. No blade could strike true against Vargosh. No spell could bind him. He wreathed himself in fire, his wings unfurling into storms that scoured the land clean. His axe, now reborn in living flame, drank deep of souls with every swing. It song a dirge of unending slaughter. The blood gods, mighty beyond comprehension, stirred on their brass thrones. Khorne himself watched with burning eyes, the Lord of Skulls momentarily still as the echoes of this new fury reached even his crimson citadel. Other gods turned wary gazes upon the growing tide, their domains shivering beneath the weight of a legend not of their making. The mortals prophesied in hushed, broken voices. They spoke of a day yet to come, when the Ashen Phoenix would turn his fury not only upon the world, but upon the very heavens, when he would climb the mountain of skulls, wings ablaze, to challenge the blood god himself for dominion over wrath, over fire, over all things drowned in blood and hate. They spoke of a final war, a war where gods bled like mortals, a war where the skies would burn, the seas would boil, and all of existence would scream as it was torn apart in the grip of one being's endless, insatiable rage. And somewhere, far across the poisoned skies and broken earth, beneath the baleful gaze of the black sun, Vargosh marched. The ground cracked and smoldered beneath his feet. His army howled their devotion into the seething winds. And the world, mortal and demon alike, trembled, because they knew the age of fire and blood had begun, and there would be no end